It was the kind of meeting that made my skin crawl. I'd been through countless briefings, many of them top secret, but this one had a different weight to it. The room was suffocating in its silence as I sat across from Samantha Gray, the agency's new director of operations. She didn't trust me, or anyone for that matter, and I could see it in her sharp eyes, the way her fingers tapped restlessly on the table. Gray was young, too young for her position, if you asked me, but she had the kind of ambition that made even seasoned agents tread carefully. She stared at me like she was still trying to figure out whether I'd be her ally or her problem. Sitting next to her, Dr. Marcus Voss, the mind behind the Parallel Universe project, was practically vibrating with excitement. His wiry frame leaned forward, eyes gleaming with the fervor of a man obsessed. He spoke about the portal as if it were the solution to every global crisis. Infinite resources, he kept repeating, as if that phrase alone could justify every risk we were about to take. I listened quietly, letting him spill out all the reasons why sending my team through his magnetic anomaly was worth it. He talked about energy, about new metals, about elements that didn't exist in our universe. But I wasn't here for the science lesson. I was here to get my orders. Gray cleared her throat, finally cutting through Voss's monologue. "We can't afford to get this wrong," she said, her voice cool but firm. "The risks are unprecedented." Her eyes flicked toward me, searching for a reaction. She wanted me to say something, to show my own hesitations, but I gave her nothing. I knew what this mission was. High risk, high reward. That was the game we played. Still, the silence stretched too long, so I finally nodded. "I understand the risks," I said, "but if Voss is right, the reward outweighs them. And if he's wrong, we'll know soon enough." It wasn't the reassurance she was looking for, but I wasn't there to coddle anyone. Samantha's skepticism lingered in the air like a heavy fog, but Voss, ever the optimist, pressed on. He pulled out a map of Site 12, our facility and its counterpart in the parallel universe. The other Site 12 was on an island surrounded by swamp-like waters, a place that sounded more like the setting of a horror story than a scientific exploration. The alternate site had suffered a disaster, according to Voss's earlier data. Something had gone wrong there, something that left bloodstains across its pristine floors. "Your mission," Voss said, "is to assess the damage, recover any surviving personnel, and secure the site for future extraction operations." I looked at the map, tracing the outline of the facility with my finger. It was eerily similar to our own Site 12, down to the placement of the security doors and the labs. But it wasn't ours. It was something else, something twisted. The thought of walking into an identical building, knowing it had fallen to chaos, stirred a knot of unease in my gut, but I couldn't afford to hesitate. Not in front of Gray. Not in front of my team. "We'll go in at first light tomorrow," I said, pushing away the growing doubt. "Get everything prepped. I want my team briefed within the hour." Gray's eyes didn't leave mine. "I want to make something clear, Agent," she said. "If this goes wrong, if we lose you, there will be no rescue mission. You and your team are on your own." There it was, the cold truth of the matter. We were expendable. The agency had its priorities, and they didn't include saving me if things went sideways. That wasn't new to me, but it was the first time she had said it out loud. "Understood," I replied, my voice even, though the words carried more weight than I liked to admit. By the time I left the briefing room, the sun was already setting. I walked down the corridor, my footsteps echoing in the empty space. My mind shifted gears, running through the list of things I needed to get done before morning. Harris, Laura, Cole. They were good agents, dependable, though I wondered how they'd handle what we were about to face. None of them had ever been to the other side. Hell, none of us had. This was uncharted territory. As I passed the observation window looking down at the portal chamber, I couldn't help but stop. The machine sat there like a giant, dormant beast, the magnetic anomaly swirling silently in its center. It looked almost peaceful, but I knew better. It was a gateway to another world, one that mirrored our own but twisted, broken. I stared at it for a moment longer, wondering what kind of horrors waited for us on the other side. I found my team in the briefing room, their chatter dying down as I entered. Harris was the first to stand, his bulky frame towering over the others as he gave me a quick nod. Laura and Cole were seated, both with the casual ease of agents who'd seen their fair share of danger, though I knew that this mission was unlike anything they'd ever encountered. They'd been briefed on the basics, but I needed them to understand the stakes. "We go in tomorrow," I said, not wasting time with pleasantries. "You've all seen the data. This isn't just a recovery mission. We're heading into a parallel universe, and we don't know what's on the other side. Harris frowned. You think there's still anyone left alive over there? I glanced at him, noting the tension in his jaw. We're not going in blind. Dr. Voss has his theories, but we prepare for the worst. My gaze shifted to Laura, her expression focused, and then to Cole, who raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. Stick together, follow orders, and we get in and out. No heroics. There was a beat of silence before Laura spoke up, her voice steady. What about Subject 11B? Any chance we'll run into it? I didn't answer right away. The rogue creation from the alternate universe was a wild card, something Boss hadn't fully explained. We don't engage unless we have no other choice, I said finally. We're not there to fight. We're there to get answers. As I dismissed the team, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking into a nightmare. The portal looked different when you stood right in front of it. There was something about the way the light twisted, the way the air felt thinner as you approached it. It was like staring into the eye of a storm, a calm but dangerous center that promised no way out once you were inside. I'd read the reports. I knew what the scientists had said about the anomaly, the disorientation it caused, the nausea. But standing there, knowing I was about to lead my team into it, felt like stepping off the edge of a cliff. Harris was breathing hard next to me, his bulk a solid, comforting presence in the moments before we crossed over. Laura and Cole stood just behind him, silent but ready. We were all ready, or as ready as you could be to step into a parallel universe. The machine began to hum louder, and the swirling energy of the center of the portal grew more intense. I gave one last glance to the observation room above, where Dr. Voss and Samantha Gray stood watching. Then I turned back to the team. Stay close. Whatever happens, we stick together, I said, my voice firm but calm. I had to be calm for them, if not for myself. I didn't wait for their response. With a nod, I stepped forward, feeling the pull of the magnetic anomaly as soon as I crossed the threshold. The first thing that hit me was the disorientation. It wasn't like walking through a door. It felt as though my entire body was being stretched and compressed at the same time, my mind reeling from the sensory overload. I had the distinct, unpleasant sensation that I was both falling and standing still. Colors swirled in the corners of my vision, and for a second, I wasn't sure if I'd made it through it all. But then, just as suddenly as it started, it was over. I stumbled out on the other side, catching myself before I fell to my knees. Harris came through next, looking pale but steady. Laura and Cole followed, their faces drawn tight as they fought off the same nausea I'd just experienced. We'd made it. We were in the other universe. The alternate Site 12 stretched out before us, familiar and yet entirely wrong. It was a near-perfect copy of our own, but it had the eerie quality of something long abandoned. The lights above flickered sporadically, casting jagged shadows across the white walls, and the air smelled damp, stale. My first instinct was to move, to get away from the portal, but I held my ground, letting the others gather their bearings. This place is a mess, Harris muttered, his voice unusually quiet as his eyes scanned the facility. He wasn't wrong. The alternate Site 12 had the look of a place that had seen violence recently. There were signs of struggle everywhere, smashed equipment, overturned furniture. But what caught my eye most was the streak of blood on the floor. A long, dark stain stretched across the gleaming white tiles, leading down the corridor. It was fresh, too fresh for comfort. Laura knelt next to the stain, her fingers brushing lightly across it. Something bad happened here, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't respond, but I didn't have to. We all knew what she meant. Whatever had caused this, whatever had torn through this place might still be here. And we were walking straight into it. We moved cautiously down the hall, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. The facility looked deserted, but I knew better than to trust appearances. Harris kept glancing over his shoulder, his fingers twitching near his weapon. I could tell his nerves were shot, but I needed him steady. Laura, ever focused, moved ahead with practiced precision, while Cole, quiet and cynical as always, brought up the rear. We hadn't gone more than a few hundred feet when we found him, the dying agent. He was slumped against the wall at the far end of the corridor, his breathing ragged, blood pooling beneath him. The sight stopped us all cold. He wasn't one of ours. He was from this universe, a mirror of someone we might have known. And he was in bad shape. I crouched beside him, trying to catch his eyes. They were glazed over, lost in the haze of pain. His chest rose and fell with labored breaths, and his uniform was torn and bloodied. It was clear he didn't have much time left. I leaned in, speaking low. What happened here? What did this to you? His eyes flickered, his lips parting to form words. At first, I couldn't make them out, but then he gasped. The creature, it's loose. You have to run. The words sent a chill down my spine. He was talking about Subject 11B. There was no mistaking it. The rogue creation, the weapon-turned nightmare, was here in this facility, and it was hunting. I exchanged a look with Laura, and I saw the same grim understanding reflected in her eyes. This mission had just gotten a whole lot more complicated. Before I could ask anything else, the agent's body went limp. He was gone. I stood slowly, my mind racing. We weren't just dealing with a damaged facility or a simple recovery mission. This place was dangerous, more dangerous than we'd been led to believe. And now we knew why. Subject 11B wasn't just a rumor or a possibility. It was real, and it was here. We need to move, I said, my voice hardening with urgency. Whatever did this, it's still out there. The team fell into formation behind me, the atmosphere growing heavier with each step. The alternate Site 12 felt like a tomb, and every corner we turned, every flickering light, was a reminder that we were trespassers in a place that had already claimed lives. My gut told me this was only the beginning. We pressed on, deeper into the facility, knowing that whatever was waiting for us ahead was far worse than anything we'd faced before. The silence in the corridor was so thick I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. We had moved deeper into the alternate Site 12, but every step felt like we were inching towards something we weren't prepared to face. That blood stain, the one leading us like a make-over breadcrumb trail, had vanished beneath debris, but it didn't matter. I knew where it was taking us. Subject 11B was in here somewhere, lurking in the shadows. We just hadn't found it yet. Laura took point, her posture taut with focus. Harris followed closely, keeping a hand near his weapon. I could see the unease building in him. Harris was strong, dependable in normal circumstances, but this place was gnawing at his nerves. I didn't blame him. The air here felt wrong, thick with the residue of something violent and unnatural. My own instincts were on edge, every muscle coiled tight, ready for the first sign of trouble. I knew it was coming. We all did. We reached the end of the corridor, where the dim lighting gave way to darkness, and for a moment the only sound was our collective breathing. Then out of nowhere came a low, guttural growl. It wasn't human. It wasn't even close. Every hair on the back of my neck stood on end. Without thinking, I motioned for the team to freeze. My hand gripped the weapon at my side as I scanned the blackness ahead. And that's when I saw it. Just a glimpse, a flicker of movement in the shadows. Something large, moving fast. Too fast. Contact! I shouted, my voice cutting through the stillness. In an instant, the team sprang into action, but it was already too late. The creature was on us before we had a chance to fire. It came for Cole first. He didn't even have time to scream. 1 second he was standing there, and the next he was gone, yanked into the dark with a sickening crunch. The sound echoed in the corridor, followed by silence. The kind of silence that makes your stomach drop. I couldn't see him. None of us could. Cole, Laura shouted, panic edging into her voice as she raised her weapon, scanning the space where he'd been. But there was nothing there now. Just shadows and the quiet drip of something wet on the floor. Harris cursed under his breath, the sound breaking the fragile tension that held us still. I could see his hands shaking, his body leaning just a little too far into panic. I had to act quickly, or we were going to lose him too. Stay focused, I barked, stepping forward, trying to keep my voice steady. We don't move until we know where it is. The growl came again, this time from behind us. We spun as one, weapons raised, but again there was nothing, just the dark pressing in on all sides. Subject 11B wasn't like anything we'd faced before. It was fast, intelligent, and worse, it knew we were afraid. I could feel it circling us, playing with us. This wasn't a mindless creature. This was something far more dangerous. Where's Cole? Harris' voice cracked, his eyes wild with fear. I didn't have an answer for him, and I wasn't about to give him false hope. But I knew one thing for certain, Cole was gone. If he wasn't already dead, he would be soon. We couldn't afford to go after him. Not with this thing stalking us. I didn't say it out loud, but I saw the same grim realization cross Laura's face. She nodded slightly, her eyes hard, as if to tell me she understood. We couldn't save him. We need to move, I said, keeping my voice low but firm. Get to higher ground. We find a defensible position and figure out how to deal with this thing. Laura didn't argue. Harris, on the other hand, hesitated, his eyes darting between me and the darkness where Cole had disappeared. I could see the war playing out inside him, whether to follow orders or give in to the impulse to run. But running wouldn't save him. Not from this. Now, Harris, I snapped, making the decision for him. We began to move, faster now, retreating down the corridor toward the stairwell at the far end of the facility. Every step felt like it was being watched, like the creature was letting us go just far enough before it made its next move. I kept my eyes ahead, but my mind was racing. We needed a plan, something more than just running. Subject 11B was faster than us, smarter than us, and it had the home field advantage. But we had something it didn't. We had each other. We reached the stairwell without another attack, though I could still feel its presence lingering, waiting. As we climbed, Harris's breathing grew more erratic. He was coming undone, and it was only a matter of time before it affected his judgment. I needed to get him under control. I needed him to stay focused. At the top of the stairs, we found a small observation room. It was cramped, barely enough space for the three of us, but it was defensible. I sealed the door behind us and quickly scanned the area. The windows were intact, though the flickering lights outside cast long, eerie shadows across the room. It was enough to keep the panic simmering just below the surface. Laura was already checking her gear, her face set in that determined way she had. Harris, on the other hand, was pacing, his hands trembling as he muttered to himself, "I couldn't let this go on. If Harris broke, we all broke." "Harris," I said, my tone softer than before. He stopped, glancing at me like he wasn't sure where he was anymore. "We're going to get out of this. But I need you with me. You understand?" He nodded, but it was weak, unsure. I didn't have time for a pep talk, but I gave him what I could. "You've got this," I said, meeting his eyes. "We stick together, and we get through it." Laura was the one who broke the tense moment. "It's hunting us," she said, her voice calm but deadly serious. "We need to turn the tables. We can't just wait here." She was right. Waiting wasn't an option. Whatever we did, we'd have to do it fast, and we have to do it together. But as the growl echoed once more through the facility, I couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out faster than we realized. We moved swiftly, the claustrophobic walls of Site 12 closing in as we pushed toward the docks. I could still feel Subject 11B behind us, stalking us through the corridors, lurking just out of sight. Each step we took echoed through the darkened halls, the flickering lights casting long, disorienting shadows that seemed to move on their own. Harris was still shaken, but Laura had managed to keep him from completely breaking down. We didn't have time to dwell on Cole's death or the creature hunting us. Survival was the only thing that mattered now. As we neared the edge of the facility, the structure began to change. The sterile, clinical look of Site 12 gave way to something darker, more organic. The walls seemed to sweat, and the air became thick and humid. We weren't far from the island's edge, where the murky, swamp-like waters surrounded the facility. I could feel it in the air, the shift in atmosphere, the way the ground sloped toward the docks. Whatever was out there was worse than the creature that had killed Cole, worse than anything we had encountered before. We reached the dock, its weathered wooden planks creaking underfoot. The water stretched out before us, black and still, like a massive mirror reflecting the stormy sky above. It was eerily silent, the kind of silence that presses on your chest, heavy and oppressive. I didn't trust it. Nothing about this place felt right. Harris stood at the edge of the dock, staring into the water as if expecting something to rise from the depths. And then it did. The water rippled, just slightly at first, as if disturbed by something far below. I stepped forward, hand raised, motioning for the others to stay back. Laura and Harris stopped in their tracks, eyes fixed on the water. For a moment, I thought it was just our nerves playing tricks on us. Then the surface broke, and something massive began to rise. It emerged slowly, deliberately, as if it had been waiting for us. At first, all I could see was its bulk, a shadowy, indistinct mass that rippled with the water. But then I saw its eyes. Two enormous, glowing orbs stared at us from beneath the surface, intelligent and cold. My breath caught in my throat as the creature fully surfaced, its massive form looming over the dock. It was like nothing I'd ever seen before. A creature of the deep, ancient, and powerful. Its scales glistened in the dim light, shifting colors as it moved. "Sea luck," Laura whispered, her voice barely audible. I'd heard rumors about the sea luck, a creature said to dwell in the waters of this alternate universe, but I had never believed them. Until now. The thing was enormous, easily the size of a small ship, but there was something about the way it moved, something deliberate and aware. It wasn't a mindless predator. It was something more, something dangerous, but not hostile. The creature regarded us in silence for what felt like an eternity. I could feel its gaze, heavy and unblinking, as if it were weighing its options. I tightened my grip on my weapon, unsure whether we were about to face another fight. But then, without warning, a voice echoed in my head. It wasn't a voice in the traditional sense. It was more like a thought, an idea planted directly into my mind. You seek to escape. I stiffened, glancing at the others. From the looks on their faces, they'd heard it too. The sea luck was communicating with us, telepathically. I had no idea how or why, but this creature knew what we were doing here. It understood. Yes, I replied, my voice steady, though I wasn't sure if it could hear me aloud or through the connection in my mind. We need help. There was a pause, and then the voice came again, clearer this time. You are hunted. I didn't have to explain. It already knew about Subject 11B. Somehow, this creature understood the danger we were in, and more surprisingly, it seemed to care. The sea luck lowered its massive head toward the dock, closer now, its glowing eyes fixed on me. I could feel the weight of its thoughts pressing against mine, not invasive, but probing. I will aid you, but the cost will be high. It didn't hesitate. We didn't have a choice. We'll pay it, I said, glancing back at Laura and Harris. They nodded, though I could see the doubt in their eyes. We all knew there would be a price, and it wasn't likely to be something we could bargain for. But we were out of options. Subject 11B was still out there, and if we didn't find a way to stop it, we were as good as dead. The sea luck withdrew slightly, its massive form sinking just beneath the surface of the water once more. I could still see its eyes, glowing faintly beneath the ripples. Lure the beast to the water, it said. I will do the rest. I exhaled slowly, the tension in my chest loosening just a little. We had a plan now, a slim chance of survival. But it hinged on getting Subject 11B to the docks, and that was easier said than done. The creature had already proven itself to be intelligent, cunning. It wouldn't just walk into a trap. We would have to outsmart it, outmaneuver it. And we would have to do it quickly. Harris, I said, turning to him, you're going to have to bait it. We need it here on the dock. Harris swallowed hard, his face pale but determined. He knew what I was asking him to do. It wasn't just a diversion. It was a gamble with his life. But he nodded, gripping his weapon tightly. I'll do it, he said, his voice steadier than I expected. We began to set up, knowing we didn't have much time. Subject 11B would find us sooner or later, and when it did, we would be ready. The sea luck waited beneath the water, silent and watchful, while we prepared for the final confrontation. There was no turning back now. I could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on us, the knowledge that this was it. The creature would come, and we would either succeed or we wouldn't. But as I glanced at Harris and Laura, I felt a flicker of hope. We had a chance, slim though it was, and with Sea Luck's help, we might just survive this. We just had to make sure Subject 11B took the bait. The plan was simple, at least on paper. Harris would lure Subject 11B to the docks, and once it was in position, the Sea Luck would take care of the rest. Simple, but nothing about this mission had been simple so far, and I knew this moment would be no different. Standing there on the weathered wooden planks of the dock, staring out into the murky water where the Sea Luck waited, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to go wrong. I forced myself to push those thoughts aside. Doubt was a luxury I couldn't afford right now. Harris stood a few feet away, his back rigid, fists clenched. He hadn't said much since agreeing to play bait, but I could see the fear in his eyes. I couldn't blame him. Subject 11B had already taken Cole, and none of us wanted to be next. But Harris knew what was at stake, and he was ready, as ready as anyone could be for something like this. Just stay close, I said to him, my voice low but steady. Lead it here, and we'll do the rest. He nodded, though the fear hadn't left his face. Without another word, Harris turned and started back toward the facility. I watched him go, my heart pounding in my chest. Every step he took felt like another tick on a clock winding down to something inevitable. Laura stood next to me, her eyes scanning the horizon, as if expecting the creature to burst out of the shadows at any moment. It's going to find him, she said quietly, not looking at me. It knows we're still here. I didn't respond. She was right, of course. Subject 11B was hunting us, and it was only a matter of time before it came for Harris. But this was the only chance we had. We needed the creature to be exactly where we wanted it, on this dock, vulnerable to the sea luck. Anything less than that would mean certain death for all of us. Minutes passed, though it felt like hours. The tension was unbearable, the silence of the island amplifying every distant creak of wood or splash of water. I kept my eyes on the facility, waiting for the sound of Harris' footsteps, for the growl of Subject 11B. Then I heard it. A crashing sound echoed from the facility, followed by a roar, deep, guttural, and angry. Harris had found it, or rather, it had found him. I tensed, my fingers gripping my weapon tightly, though I knew it would be useless if things went south. A second later, I saw Harris running toward us, his face pale, eyes wide with fear, and behind him, like a nightmare-given form, was Subject 11B. It was worse than I had imagined. The creature was massive, its body twisted and grotesque, a dark, hulking figure that moved with terrifying speed. Its eyes glowed faintly in the dim light, filled with a malevolent intelligence that chilled me to the core. There was nothing human left in it, nothing but rage. "Harris, faster!" I shouted, my voice barely carrying over the sound of the creature's heavy footsteps pounding against the ground. Harris sprinted toward the dock, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Subject 11B was gaining on him, its monstrous form barreling forward with relentless purpose. I could feel the adrenaline coursing through my veins, my heart hammering in my chest. This was it. This was the moment. Either the plan worked or we were all dead. Harris reached the dock just as Subject 11B closed the gap. Without thinking, I grabbed him by the arm and pulled him forward, dragging him out of the creature's path as it slammed into the dock. The wood groaned under the weight of the impact, splintering beneath Subject 11B's bulk. It snarled, its glowing eyes locking onto me with terrifying focus. That's when Laura made her move. Without hesitation, she threw herself between me and the creature, pulling the pin on a grenade she had been holding. "Go!" she shouted, her voice filled with determination. "Laura, no." I reached for her, but it was too late. She tossed the grenade directly at Subject 11B, the explosion ripping through the air with a deafening roar. The force of the blast knocked me backward, and I hit the ground hard. The wind knocked out of me. For a moment, everything was chaos. Smoke billowed around the dock, the sound of splintering wood and water splashing against the shore filling my ears. I struggled to push myself up, my vision blurred from the impact. But as the smoke cleared, I saw it. Laura was gone. The dock where she had stood was a shattered wreck, debris scattered everywhere. And Subject 11B was still standing. The grenade had wounded it badly. One of its limbs hung limp, and its body was scorched and bleeding. But it wasn't dead. Not yet. It let out a horrible guttural growl, staggering toward us, its glowing eyes now filled with fury. Laura's sacrifice hadn't been in vain. It had slowed the creature down. But we still needed the sea luck to finish the job. "Harris, get back!" I shouted, my voice hoarse from the explosion. He scrambled to his feet, retreating to the edge of the dock as the sea luck rose from the water once more. The creature's massive form broke the surface, its glowing eyes fixed on Subject 11B. The water rippled around it, waves crashing against the dock as it moved with surprising grace for something so large. For a moment, the two creatures stared at each other, an eerie silence hanging in the air. Then, with a sudden burst of speed, the sea luck lunged forward, its massive jaws snapping around Subject 11B. The creature let out a final deafening roar as the sea luck dragged it into the depths. The water churned violently for a moment, and then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. The surface of the water stilled, and the sea luck disappeared into the murky depths, taking Subject 11B with it. I collapsed onto the dock, gasping for breath, my body aching from the explosion and the tension that had held me rigid for so long. Harris sat beside me, his face pale and expressionless, as if he couldn't quite comprehend what had just happened. Laura was gone, Cole was gone, but we were still alive, for now. The silence returned, broken only by the gentle lapping of water against the dock. We had won, but the victory felt hollow. We had lost too much. As I stared out at the dark water, I couldn't help but wonder if it had all been worth it. We had survived, but at what cost? The sea luck had kept its promise, but I knew this wasn't the end. Not for me. Not for Harris. There would always be more missions, more creatures, more sacrifices. But as I sat there, breathing in the damp, heavy air, I couldn't shake the weight of Laura's final act. She had given everything for us to survive. And we had. But survival, I realized, was never as simple as just staying alive. The dock was eerily still after the battle, the air heavy with the aftermath of destruction. Laura's sacrifice, the Sea Lux intervention. It had all culminated in a victory we could barely process. Subject 11B was gone, dragged into the depths by the sea creature, but the cost of that victory lingered in the back of my mind like a weight I couldn't shake. The wreckage of the dock mirrored the wreckage inside me, the realization that we had made it this far, but the mission was far from over. Harris sat beside me, its face pale, his body still trembling with the aftershocks of adrenaline. He hadn't said a word since the sea luck vanished beneath the waves, and I wasn't sure I had the energy to speak either. The water lapped quietly at the edges of the broken dock, a strange contrast to the violence we had just survived. But we couldn't sit here forever, and I knew it was only a matter of time before more dangers from this universe found us. Come on, I said quietly, pushing myself to my feet, though my legs felt like lead. We need to get back to the portal. Harris didn't respond at first, just staring out at the water where the sea luck had disappeared. He looked haunted, and I couldn't blame him. I felt the same. Slowly, he nodded and rose to his feet, though his movements were stiff, mechanical. We had to keep going, even though it felt like a part of us had been left behind on that dock. The path back through the facility was quieter than I'd expected. Every step felt like it echoed through the hollow halls of the alternate Site 12, the flickering lights casting jagged shadows that made everything feel more surreal. The facility had become a graveyard of sorts, not just for the people who had worked here, but for Cole and Laura, for the pieces of ourselves that we had lost. We didn't speak as we moved, the silence hanging between us like a thick fog. The facility's emptiness felt different now. It wasn't just the presence of Subject 11B that had made the place dangerous. There was something inherently wrong with this world, this mirror image of our own. Every corner we turned felt like it held the possibility of more horrors, more dangers that we couldn't yet see. And I knew deep down that this universe wasn't finished with us. Even with 11B gone, there were still dangers lurking in the shadows. We passed the spot where we found the dying agent, his warning echoing in my mind. The bloodstain was still there, a reminder of how easily we could have shared his fate. I glanced at Harris as we walked, noting how he avoided looking at the stain. His hands were clenched into fists, his shoulders tense, as if bracing for another attack. I understood the feeling. This place had a way of keeping you on edge, of making you feel like the next disaster was only a breath away. As we neared the portal room, I could feel the pull of it, the strange, disorienting hum that had been present since we first crossed over. It felt stronger now, more urgent, like the universe itself was trying to push us out. Or maybe it was just that I was ready to leave, ready to be done with this nightmare. I could sense Harris felt the same. His pace quickened, his eyes locked on the door ahead. But as we entered the portal chamber, a new sound broke through the oppressive silence. A low, rumbling growl, different from Subject 11B, but just as menacing. My heart sank. We weren't alone. I motioned for Harris to stop, and we both crouched, eyes scanning the dimly lit room. I couldn't see the source of the sound, but I could feel it. Something big, something dangerous was here with us. "We have to get to the portal," I whispered, keeping my voice low. Harris nodded, but his face had gone pale again, and I could see the fear creeping back into his eyes. We didn't have much time. The portal stood at the far end of the room, glowing faintly, its magnetic anomaly swirling in the center. Our way home. But whatever was in here with us wasn't going to let us reach it without a fight. We moved slowly, keeping to the shadows, trying to stay out of sight. The growling continued, though it seemed to be coming from all directions at once, as if the creature was circling us. I couldn't tell where it was, and that made it even worse. Every step felt like it could be our last. And then, from the darkness, it lunged. I barely had time to react. A massive hulking shape burst from the shadows, its glowing eyes locking onto us with terrifying speed. It wasn't Subject 11B, but it was just as monstrous. Its body was twisted, malformed, as if the universe itself had corrupted whatever this thing once was. Harris let out a yell, raising his weapon, but the creature was too fast. It slammed into him, knocking him to the ground with a force that made the floor shudder. "Harris!" I shouted, but there was no time. The creature turned toward me, its eyes glowing with a malevolent hunger. My hand moved to my weapon, but I knew I wouldn't be fast enough. The thing was already on me. But just as it leaped, something changed. A familiar sensation washed over me, the same feeling I'd had when the sea luck communicated with us. I couldn't explain it, but I felt a presence in my mind, strong and ancient, like the deep currents of the ocean. And then, as if called by some unseen force, the creature stopped, its glowing eyes flickering, its body frozen mid-attack. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed Harris by the arm, pulling him to his feet, and we ran. The creature remained frozen, its eyes still glowing, but unmoving, as if some otherworldly force was holding it in place. I didn't question it. I didn't have time to. We reached the portal just as the creature let out a final guttural roar. The magnetic anomaly swirled around us, the disorienting pull of it stronger than ever, but we didn't stop. With one last glance back at the monstrous form still locked in place, we stepped through. The disorientation hit me like a wave, the world spinning and folding in on itself as the portal dragged us back into our own universe. For a moment, I wasn't sure if we'd made it. The nausea, the pulling sensation, it felt like being torn apart and stitched back together again. But then, with a sudden, gut-wrenching lurch, we were through. We stumbled out onto the cold, sterile floor of our own Site 12, the portal behind us humming quietly as it powered down. I collapsed to my knees, gasping for breath, my mind struggling to catch up with what had just happened. Harris was beside me, his face pale, his body trembling, but we were alive. We had made it. We had made it through, but the moment my knees hit the cold concrete floor of Site 12, I knew something had shifted inside me. The portal hummed behind us, its glow dimming, as if it were finally satisfied to have delivered us back to our world. But the portal was just a machine. It didn't feel the weight of what we had gone through. I did, and Harris did too. I glanced over at him, still catching his breath, his face pale and streaked with sweat. His eyes were glazed, unfocused, as if he couldn't fully process that we were finally home. I understood the look. Coming back from the alternate universe felt unreal, like waking from a nightmare that still clung to the edges of your consciousness. Only this wasn't a dream we could wake up from. Never again, Harris muttered, barely loud enough for me to hear. He was staring at the ground, his hands shaking slightly. We're never going back there. I nodded, even though he wasn't looking at me. I felt the same. That place had taken more from us than just Cole and Laura. It had stolen something deeper, a part of ourselves that wouldn't be easy to reclaim. The darkness, the creatures, the feeling that the entire universe was bent on crushing us. It was still with me, pulsing just under the surface of my skin. The heavy steel door to the portal room slid open with a hiss, and I looked up to see Samantha Gray standing in the doorway. Her face was unreadable, but her eyes narrowed as she took in the sight of us, disheveled, exhausted, alive. Dr. Marcus Voss stood just behind her, fidgeting with his clipboard, his usual energy tempered by the weight of our return. "You made it back," Gray said, her voice flat, almost disbelieving. She stepped further into the room, her gaze shifting from me to Harris, then to the still-shut portal. "And the others?" I swallowed hard, pushing myself to my feet. My body ached with every movement, the pain a reminder of what we had left behind. "Cole and Laura didn't make it," I said, my voice hoarse. "Subject 11B. It got Cole. Laura sacrificed herself to give us a chance to escape." Gray's expression didn't change, but I could see the tension in the way her hands clenched at her sides. She wasn't heartless, just hardened. Death was part of the job, and she had been around long enough to know that. But I knew she understood the weight of those losses, even if she didn't show it. "We were able to neutralize 11B. I continued, my voice steadier now. "The sea luck. The creature we encountered, it helped us. It dragged 11B into the water." Dr. Voss perked up at that, his eyes gleaming with the curiosity of a scientist who had just been handed new data. "The sea luck? You made contact with it." He stepped forward, almost breathless. "That's incredible. We theorized it might exist, but actual contact, this could change everything." I ignored him. His excitement felt out of place, like he had forgotten the cost of what we had been through. But that was Voss, always thinking about the science, about the bigger picture. Never about the people who paid the price for his theories. Gray, on the other hand, wasn't distracted by Voss's enthusiasm. She kept her focus on me, waiting for something. I knew what she wanted. I had felt it the moment I stepped back into this world. The nagging certainty that something about that portal was wrong. And it wasn't just the alternate universe or the creatures that lurked there. It was the portal itself, the door that should never have been opened in the first place. I met her gaze, feeling the weight of the words before I spoke them. "We can't go back," I said quietly, but firmly. "Whatever is on the other side of that portal, it's not just dangerous. It's wrong. We were lucky to make it out alive, but the next team won't be. It's unstable, unpredictable, and it's not worth the risk. Gray didn't respond right away. She just stared at me, her expression unreadable. Then finally she nodded, a slow, deliberate motion. You think it's too dangerous to keep the portal operational? I know it is, I said, my voice firm. Shut it down, seal it, and never open it again. There was a beat of silence, thick with the weight of what I had just said. Dr. Voss looked like he was about to argue, but one glance from Gray silenced him. She understood. She might have been skeptical before, but after seeing us, hearing about what had happened, she knew I wasn't exaggerating. I'll make the call, she said quietly, her voice softer now. The portal will be shut down permanently. I exhaled, the tension in my chest loosening just a little. It wasn't over, not really. The things I'd seen, the things we'd survived, they would stay with me. But knowing that portal would be sealed, that no one else would have to face what we faced, was enough for now. As Gray and Voss turned to leave, I glanced at Harris. He hadn't moved from his spot on the floor, his eyes still distant, staring at nothing. He was still there, in that other world, lost in the horror of it all. I crouched down beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. We made it, I said quietly. We're home. Harris looked at me, his expression hollow. I don't know if I ever will be, he muttered. And I knew exactly what he meant. As I stood and walked out of the portal room, the weight of the mission still heavy on my shoulders, I couldn't help but glance back one last time. The portal stood silent, dormant for now, but its presence still loomed, a reminder of the fragile line between worlds. I had delivered the warning, and the portal would be sealed. But some doors, once opened, can never truly be shut. We had survived the mission. But survival wasn't the same as living. That would be the next battle, the one I wasn't sure I knew how to fight.